Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, we're opening today in absolute darkness. I want you to literally close your eyes for a second and imagine sitting in a completely pitch black room. I'm talking about a room so entirely devoid of light that you can't see the walls, you can't see the ceiling, and you can't even see your own hands resting right there in front of you. And out of that profound, just overwhelming darkness emerges what is arguably the single most fundamental, monumental inquiry of the entire human experience. It's a question that has quite literally sparked the rise and fall of ancient empires. It's inspired our absolutely greatest works of art, our towering cathedrals, our deepest poetry, and it has driven mystics out of the comforts of everyday civilization and into the barren, isolated desert, just searching for an answer. So let's dive right into this.
What is God? It is, without a doubt, the most frequently asked question in the history of our species. Yet for all our brilliant theology, for all our mystical revelations, and for all our rigorous philosophy over thousands and thousands of years, nobody can fully, comprehensively answer it. Nobody. Today, we're taking a comparative philosophical journey right into the heart of that profound mystery. We're going to impartially examine how the vast, beautiful spectrum of human tradition has essentially attempted to grasp ultimate reality. Now, we aren't here today to declare a winner. We're not going to tell you which answer is perfectly right. That's not the point. We are here to show you exactly how these brilliant philosophical systems actually function, how they shape the world we live in, and how they attempt to map the infinite.
Part 1. A Torch in the Dark.
To properly examine all of this, we really need a fiercely impartial framework. We need a systematic way to look at how human beings approach a reality that is fundamentally entirely beyond our normal biological comprehension. So for that, we're going to turn to the philosopher Immanuel Kant. In his monumental works, like the Critique of Pure Reason and his Prolegomena, Kant lays out this brilliant, but honestly incredibly humbling truth about human epistemology. He explains that our minds are built strictly to understand things that exist within space and time. That's it. We rely on distinct mental categories, like cause and effect or quantity, just to make sense of everyday empirical reality. But the ultimate reality of God lies entirely beyond those cognitive limits. We literally just do not possess the mental hardware required to process the infinite in its absolute totality. We are finite machines trying to compute an infinite code. Yet, as Kant astutely points out, human beings are wired with this irresistible natural tendency to transgress these limits anyway. We are compelled to seek a principle of absolute unity. We just can't help but reach out into the void.
So to understand our approach today, I want you to imagine every single human tradition as a single torch, shining a bright beam of light into that vast, pitch-black room we talked about earlier. Each torch illuminates something entirely real on the floor of the room, a specific texture, a sharp edge, a really profound truth about existence. But here's the absolutely critical philosophical anchor for our journey today. None of the torches illuminate the entire room. The room is always invariably larger than the beam. To truly learn from these incredibly diverse traditions, we have to adopt this exact specific posture. We have to rigorously study the bright, brilliant light of the doctrines presented to us, yes, but we must also have the courage to look deeply at the shadows dancing just outside the edges of that light. We have to apply this by recognizing the beautiful, inherent limits of our own understanding.
Part 2. The Abrahamic Torches.
Let's step into our first major grouping of traditions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. While beautifully distinct in their own right, they do share a foundational operating system. They approach the absolute through the lens of a distinct creator who stands entirely apart from the physical creation and who continuously reveals ultimate truth through the progression of linear history. We begin with Judaism and the revelation of YHW. Judaism, well, it presents this incredible, vibrant paradox. On one hand, God is entirely transcendent, wholly other, residing far, far beyond the physical realm. But on the other hand, the rabbis developed what historians often refer to as a normal mysticism. This is the intimately tangible, heavy presence of the divine in everyday life, frequently referred to as the Shekinah. It's a presence you might feel standing at the heavy wooden doors of the synagogue or even in the simple, quiet act of walking down the street. Early Jewish mystical texts, like the deeply complex Sefer Yetzirah, profoundly understood that this overwhelming presence could never actually be captured logically. So what did they do? They pushed language to its absolute breaking point. They were constantly rearranging the Hebrew alphabet into endless, dizzying configurations to literally bypass the rational intellect and point directly to a holiness that just shatters human comprehension. Think of it like trying to perfectly name the very source of all names. You logically cannot do it because the source itself precedes the invention of vocabulary. In practice, this completely reframes how we apply the Torah's commandments. They are not merely ancient rules to follow. They are deeply symbolic actions specifically designed to drive the practitioner beyond our clumsy, limited words and directly into the ineffable, beating ground of existence itself. Now, this immense difficulty with language birthed a really critical philosophical tool alongside these early traditions: apophatic theology. Because a boundless God fundamentally cannot be contained by human conceptual categories, mystics realized pretty quickly that they could only accurately define the ultimate reality by intensely focusing on what it is not. God is not finite. God is not corporeal. God is not temporal. To analogize this, imagine a frustrating visual trick, trying to identify a highly specific, vibrant color by furiously listing every single other color in the spectrum except the one you are actually looking at. It sounds completely counterintuitive, right? But it serves a massive, vital human purpose. Applying apophatic theology satisfies our deep, desperate need to humbly accept that our neat conceptual boxes, our carefully constructed philosophical arguments, simply cannot ever truly contain the divine. It systematically tears down the idolatry of our own minds. This relentless resistance against turning God into a simple, understandable object naturally brings us to Christianity, which approaches the absolute through the honestly dizzying concepts of the Trinity and the Incarnation. Now, it's really important to get this. The Cappadocian Fathers, these brilliant theologians in the early church, they did not evolve the Trinity as a rigid, literal, mathematical fact. They developed it as a dynamic theological dance. They did this specifically and intentionally to prevent God from ever becoming too rational or too easily understood. They were terrified of a simplistic idolatry where humans just project our own everyday human thoughts, emotions, and logic onto the divine sky. And alongside this Trinity is the Incarnation, the Logos, the supreme divine word, actively submitting to human, fleshy, corporeal existence. Philosophically, this functioned as a profound mechanism of mutual participation. It allowed the perfectly divine to physically enter the corruptible, painful nature of bodily existence to redeem it from the inside out. To truly grasp this Christian paradigm without just accidentally falling into simple polytheism, you have to think of the Trinity not as three separate gods sitting on three separate thrones, but as the intricate mechanics of a single flame. You have the light, you have the heat, and you have the combustion. They are entirely distinct properties doing very different things, but if you remove just one of them, the flame fundamentally ceases to exist. As for the Incarnation, picture the supreme author of a great, sweeping novel suddenly, inexplicably, writing themselves right into the story, putting on the exact same paper and ink as their own characters in order to save the narrative from falling apart. The consequence of applying this theology is monumental. It insists that God is not just a larger, more powerful version of a human being. While personal connection is absolutely necessary here, the Christian framework ultimately points the believer toward a profound, self-emptying mystery that totally defies simple logic. Let's step over into the light of the Islamic torch now, which is entirely defined by the uncompromising principle of Tawhid. When the Quran asserts the unity of God, or Allah, it is completely misunderstanding the text to view this merely as a numerical definition. Tawhid is not about math. It is not just saying one instead of three. It is an earth-shattering assertion of absolute unity and the sole priority of God as the only true, perfect reality in existence. This is physically and powerfully represented by the empty center of the Kaaba in Mecca. It's empty because absolute unity fundamentally cannot be captured, contained, or represented by any physical idol or form. Islamic theology meticulously distinguishes between God as He is in His totally inaccessible, unknowable essence, which is known as al-Dhat, and the face of God that is actively turned toward the physical world. In this framework, the absolute alone has true independent existence. Absolutely everything else in the universe only exists insofar as it temporarily participates in this essential perfect being. So you might be wondering, how does a human mind comprehend an empty center? How do you actually connect with a God so incredibly unified it defies all description? Well, the Islamic tradition offers the 99 names, attributes like Al-Ghani, the infinitely rich, or Al-Alim, the all-knowing. Instead of viewing Tawhid as simple arithmetic, picture the 99 names as an incredibly brilliant, perfectly cut diamond. That diamond takes the single, blinding, impossible beam of pure white light of the Absolute and refracts it out into 99 distinct, beautiful, understandable rays of color that our limited human eyes can actually perceive without burning up. This analogy completely structures how we apply the Islamic worldview. Muslims integrate their entire daily lives by focusing intensely on this ultimate reality, a pursuit beautifully encapsulated in the famous tradition, "I was a hidden treasure, I want it to be known."
Part 3. The Dharmic Torches. Now, we are shifting our gaze eastward, moving from the Middle East over to the Dharmic traditions of India. We are entering a fundamentally different cosmological operating system here. In this system, time is not a straight line moving toward a final judgment. No, time is beautifully cyclical and beginningless. There is no single, isolated, personal creator standing entirely outside of the universe pulling the strings. In this worldview, the ultimate goal of existence is not participation in history's grand divine plan, but ultimate liberation from the endless cycle itself. In the dominant Hindu philosophical traditions, the ultimate reality is Brahman. Brahman is the sacred, vibrating power sustaining all existing things. The universe is not a separate, external object spun up out of nothingness. The universe is God's literal self-expression. The absolute truth is constantly covered by the veil of Maya, the illusion of matter. But here is the really profound twist. Matter, when specifically dovetailed for the cause of the absolute truth, actively regains its spiritual quality. So, if the Abrahamic God is the distant author of the novel we talked about, Brahman is the very paper and ink the divine novel is actually printed on.
Because of this deep interconnectedness, Hindu worship brilliantly holds simultaneous space for two distinct realities: Nirguna Brahman, which is the sheer absolute possessing entirely no material attributes, and Saguna Brahman, the absolute represented with vivid, specific attributes. Picture Nirguna Brahman as the vast, deep, unchanging silent water of an infinite ocean. Saguna Brahman, then, represents the turbulent waves rising up from the surface of that ocean, temporarily taking on breathtaking forms and names like Vishnu, Shiva, or Lakshmi, dancing for just a moment before crashing back down and returning seamlessly into the exact same source water. By applying transcendental consciousness, this dynamic changes absolutely everything about daily life. It means that every single mundane action you perform, when done correctly, becomes a sacred sacrifice that purposefully re-emerges your specific wave back into the infinite ocean.
This deep focus on individual spiritual mechanics naturally brings us to Buddhism, which offers a radical, non-theistic approach to ultimate reality. The historical Buddha actually maintained a famous, profound silence regarding a creator God. Now, he didn't explicitly deny the existence of various gods. They definitely populated his cultural background, but he believed they were practically useless for the urgent goal of salvation. Why? Because the gods, no matter how powerful or how incredibly long-lived they are also caught up in the exact same painful realm of flux, suffering, and the endless cycle of rebirth as we are. They need enlightenment just as badly as human beings do. Therefore, ultimate truths simply cannot rely on a creator. They have to be grasped intuitively through rigorous internal discipline. For Buddhism, the absolute ultimate reality is the Dharma, the fundamental, unyielding law of reality, and the resulting state of nirvana, which sits vastly, vastly higher than any temporary god. Beings cannot rely on divine grace. They must rely entirely on correct living to save themselves.
To truly grasp this non-theistic perspective, think of the strict physical conditions required to sustain a blazing fire. You absolutely need fuel, you need oxygen, and you need a spark. If you methodically, systematically remove just one of those necessary conditions, the flame simply disappears. It ceases to be. But the vast, infinite sky, the true Dharma, remains forever untouched by the presence or the absence of the fire. In the Buddhist framework, endlessly arguing over the precise nature of a creator god is quite literally like fiercely arguing about the specific color of the wind. It's an illusion. It is a complete and total distraction from the actual work at hand. The practical way to apply this is realizing the goal is never to name the unnameable void, but to rigorously, painstakingly remove the conditions of our own psychological suffering until we attain ultimate liberation.
Part 4. The Divine in Between.
So we have analyzed 5 incredibly powerful traditions, 5 massive philosophical torches casting long shadows into that room. But there is a 6th answer, a vital perspective that absolutely deserves the exact same rigorous philosophical weight as the towering temples of the East and the vast cathedrals of the West. We are going to look through the African philosophical lens. We are talking about Ubuntu. Now, to be incredibly clear right off the bat, Ubuntu is not merely a pleasant social code, nor is it just a localized myth or cosmology. We explored Zulu cosmology back in episode 1. Ubuntu is a profound, deeply sophisticated relational theology. It radically challenges the Western and Eastern notions of a solitary absolute. In this framework, the divine is absolutely not an isolated, independent entity sitting all alone on a celestial throne somewhere. It is not a cold, abstract concept floating endlessly in the empty void. The divine is the crackling, tangible light that emerges only in the active connection, the physical and emotional space between people. The absolute literally requires human community to become fully manifest in the universe.
To truly visualize Ubuntu as a theology, I want you to imagine two large mirrors facing each other in a perfectly dark room. Alone, in total isolation, neither mirror produces a single photon of light. They are dormant. But when they are positioned to face each other perfectly and a tiny spark is introduced, they reflect, magnify, and multiply a brilliant, blinding light that neither mirror could have ever possibly generated in sheer isolation. The profound way we apply this relational reality is staggering. When one human being turns away from another in anger or apathy, when that vital connection breaks, the divine light literally dims in the universe. God is not above us. God happens between us.
Part 5. Shadows on the Wall.
We have covered immense, staggering philosophical ground today, haven't we? We've examined transcendence, physical incarnation, mathematical absolute unity, cyclical self-expression, rigorous non-theism, and profound relational theology. Let's pull all of these wildly diverse conceptual threads back together into a final master philosophical synthesis. We're going to turn to Plato's famous allegory of the cave. Imagine prisoners chained deep inside a cave since birth, entirely immobilized, forced to watch shadows cast on a stone wall by a roaring fire behind them. Because they have never seen anything else in their entire lives, they logically mistake those flickering, two-dimensional shadows for the ultimate, objective reality of the universe. When we thoughtfully apply this analogy to the human attempt to know God, we realize a really humbling truth. The flickering shadows on the cave wall are our limited human doctrines, our carefully debated theologies, our perfectly crafted holy words. They are true reflections of something incredibly real. But the ultimate reality, the blazing, overwhelming sun waiting outside the cave, is an absolute that is so intensely bright, so entirely beyond our biology, that we simply cannot look at it directly without being completely blinded.
Which brings us right back to exactly where we started, standing in Immanuel Kant's impossibly dark room. We now have 6 beautiful, entirely distinct torches shining their beams out into the pitch black. We have the deep, piercing blue beam of Jewish mysticism pushing human language to the absolute edge, the vibrant crimson beam of Christian mutual participation through flesh, the pure white, perfectly refracted light of Islamic Tawheed centered on the empty Kaaba, the rich saffron gold of Hindu cyclical expression of the infinite ocean, the steady amber light of Buddhist disciplined self-reliance, and the warm, intensely radiant diffuse glow of African relational theology happening right in the space between us. They are all shining, they are all illuminating incredibly deep, necessary human truths. But the master synthesis of our journey remains stubbornly true. The ultimate reality, the dark room itself, remains overwhelmingly, terrifyingly larger than all of our combined human light.
Which leaves us staring deeply into the thick shadows just outside the edges of our collective light. Because if every human tradition defines the absolute reality of God differently, then every tradition inherently has a radically different answer to what that God actually expects from us on a Tuesday morning. If the ultimate reality of the universe changes based entirely on the specific torch you happen to hold, then our very biological and spiritual purpose changes right along with it. The inquiry doesn't stop here. The question isn't just what is God? The question we must face next is, what did God make humans for?